Adelaide stared as the Duke of Northfield ducked beneath the low door frame and stepped into her dressing room. Suddenly, the chamber felt tiny, because he filled the space so completely. He was beautiful. That was the only way to describe a man as put together as the one who stood before her. A tall, broad-shouldered Adonis with blonde hair that was pulled back in a queue because it was too long for current fashion, a scruffy slash of facial hair across a well-defined jaw, and blue eyes that were the colour of a cloudless sky. He looked across the room at her. Their eyes met, and she could think of nothing, do nothing, be nothing except a speechless fool as he stared at her. Melinda, on the other hand, had no such problem. She let out a low curtsy. "Your Grace," she said, her tone filled with the kind of theatric deference that they normally reserve for performances of Shakespeare's works. Northfield darted his gaze to Adelaide's understudy, though he showed no interest in the pretty brunette. "Good evening."
"Melinda Cross, Your Grace,"
Melinda cooed, edging herself closer and batting her eyelashes seductively.
"I'm Mrs. Ford's understudy."
"Mrs. Ford?" Northfield repeated, his eyebrows lifting. Adelaide somehow kept her expression calm. The actresses all labelled themselves as Mrs. It was the best way to maintain a modicum of safety and decorum in a profession that was looked down upon by their so-called betters.
"Good evening, Your Grace,"
Adelaide said, moving forward at last.
"I'm Lydia Ford."
"Yes, I know," Northfield said, a tiny smirk tilting up one corner of his full lips. Great God, why did her brain have to point out that they were full? Now all she could do was stare at them. And he certainly never had that look on his face when he was in ballrooms being proper and skulky. Was skulky a word? She didn't even know any more. Either way, he looked wicked right now. Melinda looked between them slowly, and then sighed.
"Well, I can see where I'm not wanted. Good evening, you two."
"Don't shut the—" Adelaide began, but Melinda slipped from the room and closed them in together. "Door!" Northfield tilted his head. "Don't want to be alone with me?" Adelaide took a long breath and thought briefly of her first night on the stage. She'd been just as petrified as she was now, and it had gone well. Thus far, Northfield had made no indication that he recognized her true identity. All she had to do was present herself in the way he expected, and she would be fine. Somehow.
"We've only just met,"
she said, stunned by how husky her voice sounded. That fact would help her, of course, for it was a bit different than her normal tone. But why did her throat feel so thick? "Do you think it's proper for us to be alone together?" He seemed to consider the question. "Perhaps not. But I've been proper for a long time, and it's gotten me—" He trailed off, and for a brief moment she saw a flash of emotion over his face, a flash of regret and pain and anger that touched her so. She knew all those emotions very well herself, and considering what he'd been through lately, she believed he had every right to them. But she wasn't meant to know those things, gossip or not. So she smiled. "What has it gotten you?" "Nothing,"